Welcome back, guys, to Wrong Turn Horror. In tonight's episode, I'm sharing 10 real-life Halloween horror stories more disturbing than fiction. These are chilling tales of foggy streets, jack-o'-lantern shadows, and Halloween nights that ended in screams instead of laughter. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon so you never miss a new horror story from Wrong Turn Horror. Grab your headphones, turn off the lights, and let's step into the night, where Halloween isn't just a celebration, it's a warning. It was just past dusk, the kind of evening when the streetlights flicker to life and the fog from the nearby woods creeps slowly across the sidewalks. Children in costumes ran from house to house, their plastic masks glinting in the dim glow of jack-o'-lanterns perched on porches. Emily, a 16-year-old girl with a penchant for adventure, had convinced her younger brother, Jake, to join her on a solo trick-or-treating run through the older part of the neighborhood. A series of narrow streets lined with abandoned houses, overgrown lawns, and sagging wooden fences. Parents rarely ventured there. They called it the Forgotten Stretch, a place children whispered about but never really explored. Tonight, curiosity had gotten the better of them as they walked. The children noticed that the usual Halloween sounds, laughter, footsteps, the crinkle of candy wrappers, were absent. The neighborhood was strangely silent. Even the wind, which usually carried the scent of autumn leaves and pumpkin spice, felt heavy, as if it were being held back. Emily tightened her scarf and tried to brush off the unease curling in her chest. "It's just Halloween," she whispered to Jake. "Nothing scary ever happens here." But the hairs on the back of her neck stood up, a warning she chose to ignore. The first house they approached had boarded windows and a front gate twisted on its hinges. A single pumpkin sat on the porch, its candle long since burned out, leaving a hollow, empty stare. Emily hesitated but knocked anyway, her voice cracking slightly as she said, "Trick or treat." The silence that followed was immediate and suffocating. The air felt thicker, heavier, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Then, almost imperceptibly, a faint shuffling sound came from inside, a dragging, scraping noise, like fingernails across wood. Emily grabbed Jake's hand, and the two turned to leave, only to hear a soft whisper behind them. "Stay, stay." Frozen, they dared to look back. There was nothing visible, but the air felt charged, electric, as though the house were watching them. Emily's logical mind screamed that it was probably just the wind or an animal inside. But a deep, instinctual fear rooted her to the spot. That's when they noticed the door. Slowly, ever so slowly, it creaked open on its own, revealing a black interior. The kind of black that swallows light, that seems to bend shadows into shapes that shouldn't exist. Emily tried to pull Jake away, but his small hand had gone icy in hers, and he refused to move. His eyes were wide, unblinking, fixed on the darkness within. Summoning every ounce of courage, Emily whispered, "We shouldn't go in." But before she could take another step, a figure appeared inside the doorway. It was tall, impossibly thin, dressed in tattered clothing that hung from its frame like wet rags. Its face was hidden beneath a mask, a cracked porcelain mask with hollow eyes and a painted, twisted grin. The figure didn't move immediately. It just stood there, tilting its head as if studying them, as if weighing the decision to let them go. Emily felt her stomach twist. Something about the figure was wrong. It didn't belong to this world, and yet it was human enough to terrify her. Suddenly, the figure raised a hand slowly, deliberately, pointing toward the forest that bordered the neighborhood. Without knowing why, Emily understood that it wanted them to follow. Her rational mind screamed at her to run, to flee the house, the street, the neighborhood entirely. But curiosity, or perhaps the sheer stubbornness of teenage bravado, propelled her forward. "Jake, we have to go back," she murmured. But Jake, entranced, stepped forward, his small legs carrying him toward the forest. The figure retreated inside, and the door slammed shut with a finality that made Emily's ears ring. The forest was dense and dark, the branches overhead forming a nearly solid canopy that swallowed the pale light of the moon. Emily's flashlight flickered as they ventured further in, and the air grew cold, unnaturally cold, as if the night itself had been poisoned. Every sound, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the distant hoot of an owl, echoed like it was coming from every direction at once. Shadows shifted, and Emily could swear she saw the figure standing behind a tree, watching, waiting. She gripped Jake's hand, trying to maintain control, but he remained eerily silent, his eyes wide and glassy. Hours seemed to pass, though it could have been minutes. They stumbled upon a small clearing, where a decaying pumpkin patch sprawled across the ground, the rotting gourds releasing a sweet, sickly scent. And there, at the center of the patch, was a small wooden cabin, illuminated by the dim flicker of candlelight. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, carrying the scent of something foul beneath the sweetness of autumn decay. Emily felt a shiver ripple down her spine. The cabin should have been inviting, almost comforting, but it wasn't. It was wrong. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back. As they approached, the door creaked open before they could knock. Inside, the cabin was tiny, cramped, and smelled of damp wood and mold. The walls were lined with shelves filled with carved masks, dozens of them, each one more grotesque than the last. Some were human, some animal, all twisted in expressions of anguish or madness. In the center of the room sat the figure from earlier, now without the mask, revealing a pale, gaunt face with eyes as black as night. Its mouth opened, revealing teeth that were jagged and yellowed. It spoke in a voice that was almost a whisper, yet filled the entire cabin. "You should not be here." Emily stumbled backward, tripping over a loose floorboard, and her flashlight fell to the ground. In the sudden darkness, she felt hands cold, skeletal, impossibly strong, grab her arms. She screamed, and Jake screamed, but their voices were swallowed by the oppressive shadows. The figure leaned close, its breath icy on their faces, whispering, "The children of Halloween. They never leave." Panic overtook Emily's reasoning, and she fought with every ounce of strength she had. Somehow, she managed to pull free, dragging Jake with her toward the door. Outside, the forest seemed endless. The moonlight barely penetrated the thick canopy, and every step felt like they were sinking into the earth itself. Emily thought she saw the figure behind them, following silently, but every time she turned, it was gone. Just the fog curling through the trees like smoke. And then she noticed the path they had come from had vanished. The forest had shifted, twisted as though it were alive, trapping them inside its dark heart. Hours passed in a haze of fear and confusion. Emily and Jake ran, stumbling over roots and fallen branches, until they finally broke through the edge of the forest and found themselves back on the streets of their neighborhood. Relief washed over Emily until she realized something horrifying. The houses around them were empty. No lights, no movement, no laughter, only fog and silence, thick and suffocating. And then she saw it, the same figure, standing across the street, holding a pumpkin. Inside the pumpkin was a small, blackened candle, flickering weakly, and around it were carvings. Carvings of Emily and Jake's faces. Before she could react, the figure raised a hand and pointed, and Emily understood without thinking that the night was not over. Halloween had marked them, and whatever had chosen them that night would follow them forever. They ran faster than they had ever run, but the shadows lengthened behind them, whispers chasing their every step. The streets, the houses, the neighborhood they thought they knew, none of it was real anymore. Halloween had taken them, and the memory of that night would haunt them every October thereafter. Years later, people still speak of the forgotten stretch of the neighborhood, warning children not to venture near. And some claim that if you walk there on Halloween night, you can see two figures running through the fog, a girl clutching a boy's hand, disappearing into the shadows, never to be seen again. Emily and Jake are gone, swallowed by a night that should have been innocent fun. A Halloween night more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. And the figure, still there, waiting, watching, always waiting, for the next curious child to follow the wrong path. It started with 4 teenagers, Mia, Jason, Lily, and Ben, who had planned the ultimate Halloween night. They had heard rumors about an abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town, a place locals whispered about but never dared to enter. Stories claimed it was haunted by the spirit of a woman who had vanished there decades ago, leaving behind a trail of tragedy. For the teens, thrill-seekers by nature, it sounded perfect a dare, a test of courage, and an opportunity to document it all for social media. The night was crisp, with a chill in the wind that hinted at frost yet to come, and fog rolling through the streets like smoke from some unseen fire as they made their way to the mansion. The town's Halloween festivities faded behind them. The children, the laughter, even the carved pumpkins with flickering candles all disappeared as the streets grew narrower and darker. The mansion rose ahead like a shadow, its silhouette twisted against the moonlight. Its windows were shattered, and the paint peeled like flaking skin. The gate hung on rusted hinges, and a low fog curled around its base, obscuring the ground. Even from a distance, the house exuded wrongness, an almost palpable sense of dread that made Mia's stomach twist. She tried to laugh it off, telling the others, "It's just an old house. Ghosts aren't real." But the tension in Jason's jaw and the way Lily clutched her flashlight told a different story. They pushed the gate open, the metal shrieking like a scream in the quiet night. Every step they took toward the house seemed to echo, bouncing off unseen walls, making them feel small and insignificant. The front door, blackened with age and rot, was cracked open, inviting and threatening all at once. A rotten smell wafted out, a mixture of mold, decay, and something far fouler that made Ben gag. Inside, the mansion was a frozen nightmare. Dust coated every surface, cobwebs hung like curtains, and broken furniture lay strewn across the floors. The air was heavy, like it had been sealed for decades, waiting for intruders to stir its secrets. The 4 friends explored cautiously, flashlights cutting weak paths through the darkness. In the foyer, a grand staircase spiraled up into the black void, each step creaking under the slightest weight. Portraits lined the walls, their frames ornate and elegant, yet the faces within were scratched out, leaving empty eyes that seemed to follow their every move. Lily shivered. Why would someone do that? She whispered. Jason shrugged, pretending not to be afraid. But even he avoided looking directly at the portraits. They found a hallway leading to the back of the house, and there an old parlor waited, draped in moth-eaten curtains. A fireplace sat cold and empty, yet on the mantel were small, carved figurines arranged in a circle. Mia leaned closer, examining them. Each one was carved to resemble a person, tiny, detailed, lifelike, and there, at the edge of the circle, was a figurine that looked eerily like her. She laughed nervously, brushing it off as a coincidence, but the chill crawling up her spine disagreed. "It's just a doll," she whispered, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Suddenly, a soft thump echoed from upstairs, followed by another, and another, rhythmic, deliberate, like footsteps pacing the hallway. The friends froze. Jason held up his flashlight toward the staircase, but the beam barely reached the top. Shadows seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally, as though the mansion itself was breathing, watching. Lily suggested leaving, but curiosity had them rooted. They had come this far. They couldn't just turn back. The thumping grew louder, now accompanied by a whispering that seemed to come from the walls themselves. At first, it was indistinct, almost like wind passing through cracks, but then it became clearer. "Leave, now, before it's too late." The voice was thin, raspy, and chilling. Mia gripped Jason's arm, but he shook his head, determined to investigate. They crept up the stairs, each step a protest in the otherwise silent house. When they reached the landing, the hallway stretched before them, lined with doors, all closed, except one at the far end that was slightly ajar. Through the crack, they could see a faint glow, flickering like candlelight. The air there smelt different, sweet and metallic, and Mia's stomach twisted with unease. They stepped forward cautiously, and then the door swung open violently on its own. Inside, the room was small, almost like a child's bedroom, but it was frozen in time-tattered toys, broken furniture, and a mirror leaning against the wall. And in the mirror, something moved that shouldn't have. It was a pale figure, its face hidden beneath long dark hair, shifting and twitching unnaturally, standing just behind them. Panic erupted. Jason shouted for everyone to run, and they bolted down the stairs, crashing through the foyer. The front door slammed shut in their faces. They tried to open it, shaking the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The whispering grew louder, filling the entire house, a chorus of voices. "Stay. Stay with us." Desperation clawed at them as shadows crawled along the walls, stretching into grotesque shapes. The figurines in the parlor began moving, spinning in their circle, tilting toward the friends as if drawn to their fear, one by one. They felt it, a touch of cold hands brushing their shoulders, the pressure of unseen eyes watching every move. The mansion seemed to pulse with life, its floors vibrating beneath them. Jason found a side door leading to the backyard and yanked it open. The fog outside had thickened, swirling around them like living smoke. They ran blindly, stumbling over roots and uneven ground, until they reached the edge of the property. Relief was brief. Across the street, every house was dark, every window shuttered. And there, in the yard of a house they didn't recognize, stood the same pale figure, now holding one of the carved figurines, this one resembling Ben. The figure tilted its head, watching them with empty eyes. Mia screamed as the figure raised its hand, and in the blink of an eye, the yard was empty. The fog seemed to swallow it whole. The friends ran until they found themselves back at the town's main street. The Halloween festivities had resumed as if nothing had happened, children laughing, candy wrappers crunching underfoot, lights flickering in every window. They tried to tell people, tried to explain what had happened, but no one believed them. The mansion, the figure, the whispering it, was gone. And yet, in their hearts, they knew it had not left. Years later, Mia, Jason, Lily, and Ben never went near that part of town again. And every Halloween, they can't shake the memory of the fog, the whispering, and the figure waiting with carved figurines, marking the next group of curious children to follow the wrong path. Some nights, when the wind howls and fog rolls through the streets, they swear they see shadows in the corner of their eyes, hear soft whispers repeating in their ears, "Stay, stay, Halloween is never over." It started with Daniel, a teenager known in his school for being adventurous and fearless, and his younger sister, Emily, who was 8 years old and clung to her brother for courage. Their parents were working late that evening, leaving the siblings alone to celebrate Halloween with their friends. It was a clear night, the moon full and pale, fog creeping in from the nearby forest that bordered their quiet neighborhood. They had just finished trick-or-treating and were walking home, candy bags full and spirits high, when Daniel suggested taking a shortcut through the old pumpkin fielder, stretch of land that had once belonged to a family known for their elaborate Halloween decorations, but had been abandoned for years. The field was enormous, rows upon rows of pumpkins rotting in the autumn air, their carved faces melted and sinister under the silver moonlight. The ground was soft and uneven, soaked from earlier rain, and the mist curling across the field gave the impression of movement where there was none. Emily hesitated at the edge, her small hands clutching her brother's sleeve. "I don't like it here," she whispered. Daniel smiled reassuringly, though he felt the first prickle of unease himself. "Come on, it'll be fun. Nothing here but pumpkins." But as they stepped into the field, the air seemed to change. The wind became colder, the fog thicker, and the sounds of the town faded until there was only the crunch of their footsteps on wet leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. As they walked further, Daniel noticed something strange. The pumpkins seemed arranged, not in any logical order, but in patterns that felt deliberate, almost ritualistic. Some faces appeared to watch them, the hollow eyes glinting in the moonlight. Emily tugged at his arm. "Let's go back," she said, voice trembling. But curiosity pulled Daniel forward. That's when they saw it. A figure standing at the far end of the field, still and silent. At first, it looked like a scarecrow, dressed in tattered clothes and leaning on a wooden post. But as they approached, it became clear it was not a scarecrow. It moved slightly, tilting its head, revealing pale, hollow eyes beneath a hood. Fear gripped Daniel, but he tried to remain calm for Emily's sake. "It's just someone in costume," he said. The figure didn't respond. It simply raised one arm slowly, pointing toward the center of the pumpkin field. Against his better judgment, Daniel felt compelled to follow. Emily clutched his hand tightly, whimpering, but he led her forward, drawn toward the figure as if by some invisible force. Each step they took made the pumpkins seem more alive. Their carved mouths twisted into expressions of pain and laughter, whispering Daniel's name, Emily's name, though he could not discern the source. In the center of the field was an old, crumbling barn, hidden from the road by a thick row of trees. The figure stopped at the entrance, motioning for them to enter. Daniel hesitated. Every instinct screamed to turn around, but he couldn't move. Emily sobbed softly, tugging at his sleeve, pleading to go home. The air inside the barn was different, thick, suffocating, smelling of damp wood and something metallic, like blood. Shadows stretched across the walls as if reaching for them, and the faint sound of whispering echoed from the rafters. Daniel turned on his flashlight, revealing dozens of carved pumpkins arranged in a circle around a central pedestal. On the pedestal lay a Dalit's face, cracked, painted in a grin too wide. Its eyes blackened UNBLINKING. As they stepped closer, the figure emerged from the shadows, removing its hood. The face beneath was pale and skeletal, the skin stretched taut over bone, eyes hollow and empty. It didn't speak, but the sense of malice emanating from it was overwhelming. The barn seemed to pulse, the walls breathing as the whispering grew louder, almost deafening. Daniel felt a cold hand brush his shoulder, though no one was there. Emily screamed, but her voice sounded distant, as if carried away by the fog. The figure gestured toward the doll, and a terrible realization hit Daniel. The doll's face was eerily similar to Emily's. Panic surged. He grabbed Emily and tried to run, but the barn's walls seemed to stretch, elongate, trapping them inside. Shadows moved along the edges of the room, forming shapes that were almost human, almost alive. The air grew colder with each passing second, and Daniel felt the weight of unseen eyes upon them. The figure raised its arms, and the pumpkin's expressions seemed to animate, mouths opening and closing as though speaking in a language they could not comprehend. Then the doll on the pedestal blinked. Not a mechanical motion, but real, human-like. Its eyes locked onto Emily, and the barn echoed with a single whisper, "Stay." Desperation overtook Daniel. He yanked Emily toward the door, fighting against the invisible force that seemed to hold them in place. The figure moved with unnatural speed, blocking their exit at every attempt. He threw himself into the shadows, dragging Emily behind a stack of hay, barely avoiding its grasp. For what felt like hours, they darted through the barn, the whispers growing louder, more insistent, until finally they found a small trapdoor in the floor, hidden beneath old straw. Daniel pried it open, and they fell into a narrow, damp tunnel beneath the barn. The tunnel led them outside, though the night had changed. The fog had thickened, rolling across the field like a living thing. The pumpkins they had passed moments ago were gone, replaced by skeletal trees, their twisted branches reaching for them as if to claim them. The figure emerged at the edge of the field, standing still, watching them, but it did not move. Somehow, they knew it could not leave the boundaries of the field. With one last glance, Daniel and Emily ran for their lives, crashing through undergrowth, and tripping over roots until they reached the edge of the road leading back to their neighborhood. When they looked back, the barn, the field, and the figure were gone, vanished as if they had never existed. The streetlights flickered back to life, and the laughter of children resumed as if nothing had happened. But Daniel and Emily knew the truth. Something had marked them that night, a darkness that followed, unseen. For weeks afterward, they would hear whispers in the wind, shadows that moved in the corner of their eyes, and the faint scent of rotting pumpkins that no one else could smell. Years later, the old pumpkin field remained abandoned, stories of the skeletal figure passed down as a warning. Curiosity on Halloween night could lead you somewhere you could never return. And some nights, when the fog rolls in thick and the moon hangs low, people swear they can see a barn appear in the field, glowing faintly, surrounded by pumpkins that watch like eyes. And in the center, the figure waits, patient and silent, ready for the next child to wander too far, too curious, into the shadows of Halloween. It started with Marcus, a teenage boy known for his daring personality, and his two friends, Rachel and Tom. They were older teenagers, the kind who prided themselves on fearlessness and adventure. On Halloween night, they decided to explore the old Holloway house, an abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town. It had been empty for decades, its windows boarded up, its paint peeling, and its yard overgrown with weeds and fallen branches. Local legends spoke of disappearances, strange sounds, and shadows seen moving behind its windows at night, but the teens laughed at such tales. To them, it was the perfect Halloween thrill. The night was unusually cold, the kind of chill that made the fog curl lower and linger longer than normal. They approached the Holloway house, flashlights in hand, their footsteps echoing on the cracked pavement. The mansion loomed over them like a dark sentinel, every shadow a threat, every window a hollow stare. Rachel hesitated at the gate, her hands trembling. "I don't think we should go in," she whispered, but Marcus waved her off, joking that she was just scared of a few old boards. Tom, ever the practical one, shined his flashlight toward the front door, revealing a crack in the boards and the faint outline of stairs beyond. As they stepped through the gate, the atmosphere shifted. The wind died down, the usual sounds of Halloween children laughing, distant music. The crunch of leaves vanished, replaced by a heavy silence. Each step seemed to echo unnaturally, bouncing off the mansion's walls and making the friends feel small and isolated. Inside the front door, the house was a time capsule of decay. Dust covered every surface, cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and broken furniture lay scattered across the floors. The air smelled of mold, damp wood, and something metallic that made Marcus gag. They began exploring cautiously. The foyer led to a grand staircase spiraling into darkness, and portraits lined the walls. The subjects' faces were scratched out or defaced, leaving hollow eyes that seemed to watch the teens as they passed. Rachel shivered, gripping her flashlight tighter. These eyes," she whispered. Marcus laughed nervously, trying to lighten the mood. "It's just old paintings. Nothing can hurt us." But even as he said it, a cold draft brushed his neck, and a low whisper seemed to come from the shadows. "Leave, before it's too late." The friends ignored the warning, drawn toward a hallway lined with closed doors. One door at the far end was slightly ajar, and a faint orange glow spilled into the darkness. Tom moved forward to investigate, and Marcus followed, Rachel reluctantly trailing behind. The room inside looked like a child's bedroom, abandoned for decades. Torn curtains swayed despite the lack of wind, toys were scattered across the floor, and a small bed sat in the corner, its sheets yellowed and stiff with age. On a dresser sat a small pumpkin, its candle flickering weakly despite there being no apparent source of flame. As they approached, a figure emerged from the shadows, a woman, pale and thin, with hollow black eyes and long, stringy hair. She wore a tattered dress, and her skin seemed almost translucent in the flickering candlelight. She didn't speak but raised a hand, slowly, as if beckoning them closer. Marcus froze, feeling a chill run down his spine. Rachel grabbed his arm, whispering, "We need to go, now." But curiosity, or perhaps fear mixed with bravado, made them hesitate. That's when they noticed the walls the portraits were moving, faces twisted, mouths opening and closing silently, their expressions shifting from sadness to rage to terror. Panic set in. The woman's hand rose again, and the whispers grew louder, filling the room from every direction. "Stay, stay, stay with us." The candle on the pumpkin flickered violently, casting the woman's shadow across the walls. It stretched impossibly long, twisting like a living thing, moving closer and closer to them. Tom yelled to run, and the three bolted toward the door, only to find it slammed shut. They rattled the handle, tried to push it open, but it wouldn't budge. The house itself seemed alive, pulsating with an unseen energy that held them in place. In desperation, Marcus spotted a narrow staircase leading to the basement. They descended into the darkness, the air growing colder and thicker with every step. The basement was filled with crates and old furniture, but in the center was a circle of dolls, arranged as though they were observing the intruders. The dolls' faces were cracked, and their eyes seemed to glimmer with a faint, unnatural light. On the wall opposite them was a mirror, and in it they saw the reflection of the woman standing behind them. Though, when they turned, the space was empty. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and they could see shapes moving within its shadowy figures, children and animals, all twisting and reaching out as if trying to escape. Suddenly, the basement door slammed shut above them, cutting off any hope of retreat. The whispers intensified, echoing off the walls, chanting their names. The dolls seemed to move slightly, their heads tilting, their glassy eyes following them with unnerving precision. Marcus lunged for a broken crate, throwing it at the wall, hoping to create a distraction. For a brief moment, the chanting stopped, replaced by a heartbeat-like thumping that reverberated through the floor. Then the mirror shattered, and a hand, pale thin and skeletal, reached through, grasping for Marcus. Adrenaline took over. He grabbed Rachel and Tom, and they ran blindly through the basement, their footsteps echoing against the concrete. The hand reached for them again and again, brushing past their shoulders, chilling them to the bone. They found a trap door leading outside, but when they emerged, the night had changed. The street outside was no longer familiar. The houses they knew were gone, replaced by twisted, rotting structures that seemed to lean toward them. Fog rolled across the ground like a living blanket, hiding the world around them. And in the center of the street stood the woman, holding a small pumpkin in her hands. Inside was a candle flickering with a strange, dark flame, and around it were carvings their faces. The woman raised the pumpkin, and a whisper filled the night. Halloween claims, the curious. They belong to us now. The friends ran, screaming, through the fog and twisted streets, until they found the main road leading back to their neighborhood. When they looked back, the mansion, the street, the figure, all had vanished. Only the night remained, silent and indifferent. Years later, the three friends never spoke of the Holloway house again. But each Halloween, when the fog drifts low and the moon hangs full in the sky, they feel a presence, a whisper, a shadow in the corner of their vision. The memory of the dolls, the mirror, and the woman waits for them every October. And somewhere in the forgotten edges of town, the Holloway house waits as well, patient and silent, ready for the next curious souls to follow the wrong path, unaware that Halloween is not just a holiday, it's a warning. It all began with the Thompson family, David, his wife Claire, and their 12-year-old daughter Sophie. They had moved to the countryside just months earlier, seeking a peaceful life away from the bustle of the city. That Halloween, they decided to stay home, handing out candy to the local children who came knocking. The house was old, with creaking floors and drafty windows, but it was cozy, adorned with pumpkins, cobwebs, and orange string lights. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the fog rolled in from the surrounding fields, softening the edges of the trees and making shadows. Dance along the porch, Sophie was eager to join the other children. On a quick trick-or-treating run before the night ended, David hesitated, warning her not to wander too far, but she promised to stay on the nearby street. With her pumpkin basket in hand and her witch costume flaring behind her, she ran off into the fog. David watched from the porch, a sense of unease gnawing at him, though he could not say why. As the minutes stretched into half an hour, Sophie had yet to return. Claire suggested he go look for her, but David wanted to give her a few more minutes, assuming she was simply lingering at the neighbor's house. Suddenly, a strange sound carried across the fields of faint. High-pitched giggle, like a child playing, but drawn out and unnatural. David froze, scanning the foggy street. No other children were visible. The wind picked up, rustling the dry leaves, and he noticed footprints leading away from the street and into the edge of the woods. They were small, like Sophie's, but something about them seemed wrong. They twisted and turned in impossible patterns, looping back on themselves as if the ground itself was shifting. Determined, David grabbed a flashlight and ventured into the fog. Each step he took seemed heavier than the last, and the silence of the night pressed in around him. The footprints led him deeper into the woods, where the fog grew denser, swallowing the beam of his flashlight. Shadows moved just beyond the reach of the light, and he swore he saw figures standing between the trees, watching, whispering, yet vanishing when he tried to focus on them. Then he saw her Sophie, or at least someone who looked like her, standing by a cluster of dead trees. Her pumpkin basket was empty, and her costume hung limp around her. She turned slowly, revealing a face pale and expressionless, eyes wide and unblinking. David ran toward her, calling her name, but she did not respond. As he reached out, the figure dissolved into fog, leaving only a whisper in his ear, "Come, stay forever." Panic surged through him. He ran blindly through the woods, calling for Claire, but the fog twisted around him, disorienting him. The trees seemed to shift, rearranging themselves, closing off the path he had taken moments ago. The footprints his daughters, he realized, had vanished, replaced by deep, claw-like impressions in the soil. Hours or perhaps minutes passed in the suffocating fog. David stumbled upon a clearing where an old, abandoned barn loomed. Its wood was rotted, doors hanging loose on rusted hinges, but light glimmered faintly from a small window near the roof. Compelled by fear and desperation, he approached. Inside, the barn was lined with hundreds of carved pumpkins, each flickering with a candle. Some faces were traditional, some grotesque, and some horrifyingly lifelike, carved in human likeness. In the center of the barn, standing on a pedestal, was Sophia, what appeared to be her dot. The figure on the pedestal was pale and still, dressed in a tattered version of her witch costume. Its head turned slowly toward David, and he froze, the eyes black, hollow, and endless locked onto his. Around her, shadows twisted and moved, forming shapes of children, screaming silently, trapped in the flickering candlelight. Then he realized the pumpkins around the pedestal were carved in faces he recognized: friends, neighbors, and strangers, all frozen in fear, their hollow eyes staring up at him. A whisper echoed through the barn, soft at first, then growing louder. "They never leave. Halloween takes them." The shadows stretched toward him, cold and tangible, brushing his skin like icy fingers. David lunged toward Sophie, grabbing her, but her body felt cold, stiff, and lifeless. The moment his hands touched her, the barn shook violently, and the shadows exploded outward, engulfing him. The candle flames flared bright white, blinding him. And then everything went silent. When David awoke, he was outside the barn, the fog thinning as the first light of dawn touched the horizon. Sophie was gone. The woods were empty, the footprints erased. He stumbled home, haunted by the memory of her hollow eyes and the whispering promise that Halloween would return, that it would come for those who wandered too far. Claire had been frantically searching, but there were no signs of anything unusual. She hugged him, relieved, but David could not speak of what he had seen. Some things, he knew, could not be explained. Years later, the Thompson family never set foot in the pumpkin field or near the old barn again. Yet every Halloween, when the fog rolls in and the wind carries a faint, childlike laughter, David feels at the presence of shadows waiting just beyond sight, watching, whispering, and claiming. And somewhere in the depths of that field, the barn waits, filled with flickering pumpkins and trapped souls, ready for the next child to wander too far, to follow curiosity into the night, into the darkness of Halloween that is far more than a holiday. It is a warning. It began with Alex, a high school senior, and his friends Mark, Jenna, and Claire. They were known for seeking thrills, often sneaking into abandoned buildings and daring each other to face fear head-on. On this particular Halloween, they had set their sights on the old Wexler Estate mansion abandoned for decades, tucked away on a hill overlooking the town. Legends told of disappearances, strange sounds, and shadowy figures glimpsed behind boarded-up windows, but the teenagers scoffed at the warnings. To them, the mansion was simply a perfect spot for a Halloween dare. The night was unusually foggy, the moon a pale crescent barely visible behind thick clouds. As they approached the mansion, the air grew colder, the silence around them pressing like a heavy blanket. The gate creaked ominously as they pushed it open, the hinges sounding like distant screams in the still night. The yard was overgrown, trees twisted and bare, their skeletal branches swaying gently in the wind. The mansion loomed ahead, its windows dark, its facade cracked and rotting. Alex shone his flashlight on the front steps, revealing deep grooves in the wood, as if hundreds of footsteps had passed that way over years. Inside, the mansion smelled of mold, decay, and something fouler beneath a lingering scent of rot mixed with iron, like blood. Dust coated every surface, and cobwebs hung thickly from the ceiling. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, pressing down on them as if the house itself was alive and aware of their presence. The grand staircase spiraled upward, shadowed and ominous, and portraits lined the walls, faces obscured by scratches and darkened by age. Every step they took seemed to echo unnaturally, the sound bouncing back from unseen corners, disorienting them. They began exploring cautiously, their flashlights cutting weak beams through the darkness. The parlor was littered with old furniture, cracked mirrors, and remnants of what had once been a lavish home. On the mantelpiece were small figurines, tiny, lifelike models of people frozen in fear or anguish. Alex picked one up, and to his horror, it resembled Jenna. She laughed nervously, thinking it was a coincidence, but the unease in her eyes betrayed her true fear. The whispers began then, faint at first, like the wind through the broken windows, but gradually growing louder. Leave. You shouldn't be here. Stay. A sudden noise upstairs made them jumper, rhythmic thumping, like footsteps pacing above them. Claire whispered that they should leave, but Alex, stubborn and thrill-seeking, insisted on investigating. They ascended the staircase slowly, every creak of the old wood echoing through the mansion. At the top, a long hallway stretched before them, lined with closed doors. The farthest door had a faint orange glow seeping from the edges, and an almost imperceptible smell of burning candle wax filled the air. Cautiously, they pushed the door open. Inside was a child's bedroom, frozen in time. Torn curtains fluttered in a draftless room, toys lay scattered across the floor, and a small bed sat in the corner. On a dresser was a pumpkin, carved and flickering with candlelight, and in the center of the room stood a figure, a girl, pale, with hollow black eyes and hair hanging limply over her face. She did not speak, but raised a hand slowly, beckoning them closer. Alex felt a chill run down his spine. The figure's presence radiated something unnatural, a silent warning that they could not ignore. Suddenly, the mirror in the room rippled, and their reflections appeared, distorted faces twisted in agony. Eyes hollow, mouths moving as if screaming silently. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch and writhe, crawling along the walls, floor, and ceiling. The figurines on the dresser and shelves began moving slightly, turning toward them, tilting their heads as though observing, analyzing. The whispers grew louder, forming words in a voice that was both childlike and ancient. Halloween is ours. The curious belong to us. Fear overtook thrill. The friends bolted toward the door, but it slammed shut violently in front of them. The hallway beyond seemed to stretch impossibly, the mansion rearranging itself, disorienting them. Every turn, every step led them deeper into darkness. Shadows moved independently, brushing their skin with icy fingers. The candlelight from the pumpkin flickered violently, casting grotesque images across the walls. The girl in the corner of the room moved closer, though without making a sound, her hollow eyes fixed on them, desperate. Alex remembered a trapdoor they had passed in the hallway earlier. They scrambled toward it, shoving furniture aside, tripping over the warped wooden floor. The trapdoor opened into a narrow staircase, descending into the basement. The air grew colder still, smelling strongly of earth, decay, and something faintly sweet, like rotting fruit. The basement was a labyrinth of crates, broken furniture, and more figurines arranged in strange, ritualistic patterns. On a central pedestal lay a pumpkin, carved with the faces of people they recognized, neighbors, friends, and even strangers. The pumpkin's flickering light revealed the girl standing beside it, her hand hovering over the carvings. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, gaunt being, its face skeletal, its eyes black voids. It did not speak, but a wave of malevolent energy emanated from it, pressing them to the ground. The figurine's eyes glowed faintly as if feeding on their fear. The girl on the pedestal whispered softly, almost in a voice that David could feel rather than hear, "Stay. Halloween takes the curious." Panic surged. Alex grabbed Jenna and Claire, running blindly through the basement. The shadows reaching for them, brushing against their skin with icy fingers. They found an exeter small. Broken door leading to the outside, but the night had transformed. The fog had thickened, rolling like smoke across the ground. Trees leaned in unnatural angles, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers. The mansion behind them seemed to pulse, alive, watching, waiting. And there, in the distance, the girl and the skeletal figure stood, holding a flickering pumpkin. The pumpkin's flame revealed carved faces of anyone who had dared enter before. And then the shadows surged, reaching toward them, whispering their names. Alex and his friends ran through the twisted landscape until they stumbled back onto the main road. The town's lights returned, the fog lifted, and Halloween festivities resumed as if nothing had occurred. But they knew the truth. Something had followed them, marking them. Each Halloween afterward, shadows moved differently in their periphery. Faint whispers carry through the wind, and the memory of the Wexler estate, the girl, and the carved pumpkin continues to haunt them. Somewhere in the abandoned mansion, the girl and the skeletal figure wait, patient and silent, ready for the next curious teens to wander in. Halloween, they learned, was not just a night for candy and costumes, it was a warning. Curiosity could lead you into the darkness, and once it claimed you, there was no return. The mansion's shadows linger, the pumpkin's light flickers, and the whispers continue. Halloween is ours. The curious belong to us. It began with Olivia, a teenager known for her adventurous spirit, and her friends, Ryan and Mia. They had recently heard about the abandoned Hargrove estate, a large, decaying mansion on the outskirts of town. Locals whispered tales of strange lights, shadowy figures, and people who entered but never returned. To Olivia and her friends, it was the perfect Halloween deer a chance to explore the mansion and prove their courage. The night was unusually foggy, the moon hidden behind thick clouds, casting an eerie glow on the twisted trees surrounding the estate. As they approached the mansion, the air grew colder, the fog curling around their feet and obscuring the ground. The iron gate groaned as they pushed it open, the sound echoing unnaturally through the silent streets. The mansion loomed before them, dark and decayed, its windows shattered or boarded up. Shadows clung to its corners, moving independently as if alive. The usual sounds of Halloween children laughing, music from nearby houses, footsteps had vanished, replaced by a heavy silence. Inside, the air was thick and foul, smelling of mold, decay, and something metallic that made their stomachs churn. Dust coated every surface, cobwebs hung from the ceilings, and broken furniture lay scattered across the floors. The house seemed alive, breathing in the darkness, watching their every move. Portraits lined the walls, their subjects' eyes hollowed or scratched out. The friends felt an inexplicable unease, a prickle at the back of their necks, but Olivia urged them forward. Flashlight in hand, they explored cautiously, moving from room to room. In the parlor, a fireplace sat cold, blackened with soot, and dozens of figurines were arranged on the mantel. Tiny dolls, some with missing limbs, all staring at them with lifeless eyes. Ryan laughed nervously, but the sound echoed strangely, distorted and drawn out. The whispers began softly at first, like the wind through broken windows, then louder. Leave. Halloween claims the curious. Stay. Upstairs, the hallway stretched before them, lined with closed doors. At the far end, a faint orange glow spilled from under a door. They approached, hearts pounding, and pushed it open. Inside was a child's bedroom, frozen in time. Torn curtains swayed despite the lack of wind, toys lay scattered across the floor, and a small bed sat in the corner. On a dresser rested a small pumpkin, flickering with candlelight, and there, standing in the shadows, was a girl, pale, with hollow black eyes, and hair hanging limply over her face. She raised a hand slowly, beckoning them closer. The mirror in the room rippled suddenly, revealing distorted reflections. Faces twisted in fear and anguish, mouths opening silently, eyes wide in terror. The shadows in the room stretched along the walls, moving independently, crawling toward them. Olivia felt a cold draft, heard whispers directly in her ear. Halloween is ours. The curious belong to us. Panic overtook their fear-driven curiosity. They bolted toward the door, but it slammed shut violently behind them. The hallway beyond stretched unnaturally, walls twisting and rearranging themselves. Desperation surged. They ran blindly, the mansion itself seeming to shift, trapping them in a labyrinth of darkness. Shadows reached for them, brushing their skin like icy fingers. The dolls on the dresser seemed to move slightly, tilting their heads, watching, analyzing. The girl stepped forward, her hollow eyes fixed on Olivia. Around her, shadows formed figures of children, all trapped in the flickering candlelight, silent and lifeless. Then they noticed the pumpkin on the dresser flickered violently, revealing carved faces, each twisted in terror. Some they recognized from the neighborhood, others from news reports of missing children. Adrenaline drove them to search for an escape. They stumbled upon a trapdoor in the floor, leading to a narrow basement staircase. The air grew colder, damp, and smelled strongly of earth, rot, and something faintly sweet, like decaying fruit. The basement was filled with crates and broken furniture, but in the center was a pedestal. On it sat a pumpkin, carved with countless faces. Beside it stood the girl, her hand hovering over the carvings, and surrounding her were shadows of skeletal figures, silent, watching. The whispering intensified into a deafening roar. Every shadow in the room pressed toward them. Every figurine's eyes glowed faintly as if feeding on their fear. Olivia lunged toward the girl, grabbing her arm, but her hand passed through like smoke. The candlelight flickered, and the shadows surged, pressing in from all sides. The pumpkin on the pedestal suddenly flared, revealing more faces of people who had dared enter the mansion over decades. Frozen in eternal fear, desperation pushed them onward. They scrambled toward a side door, bursting into the night. But the world outside had changed. The fog had thickened, trees twisted unnaturally, shadows reaching across the ground like living arms. Somewhere in the darkness, the girl and the skeletal figures watched, holding pumpkins carved with more faces, flames flickering in unnatural rhythm. The whispers followed, promising eternal Halloween. Claiming the curious for their own, they ran blindly through the forest, branches tearing at clothes, shadows brushing against their skin. Hours or perhaps minutes later, they stumbled onto the familiar main road, the fog lifting. The town appeared normal, Halloween festivities continuing, children laughing, pumpkins glowing, but Olivia, Ryan, and Mia knew what they had seen was real. The mansion, the girl, the carved pumpkin, the whispers all remained alive in their minds. Years passed. Halloween remained a night of fear for them. Shadows moved strangely, whispers lingered in the wind, and the memory of the Hargrove estate never faded. Somewhere the mansion waits, patient and silent, filled with flickering pumpkins, trapped souls, and shadows. Halloween is not just a holiday, is a warning. Curiosity can lead you into darkness, and those who wander too far may never return. And if you ever hear a whisper carried by the wind on Halloween, or see the flicker of candlelight through the fog, remember the Hargrove estate. The shadows are waiting, the pumpkins are watching, and Halloween takes the curious forever. It began with Olivia, a teenager known for her adventurous spirit, and her friends. Ryan and Mia, they had recently heard about the abandoned Hargrove estate, a large, decaying mansion on the outskirts of town. Locals whispered tales of strange lights, shadowy figures, and people who entered but never returned. To Olivia and her friends, it was the perfect Halloween dare chance to explore the mansion and prove their courage. The night was unusually foggy, the moon hidden behind thick clouds, casting an eerie glow on the twisted trees surrounding the estate. As they approached the mansion, the air grew colder, the fog curling around their feet and obscuring the ground. The iron gate groaned as they pushed it open, the sound echoing unnaturally through the silent streets. The mansion loomed before them, dark and decayed, its windows shattered or boarded up. Shadows clung to its corners, moving independently as if alive. The usual sounds of Halloween children laughing, music from nearby houses, footsteps had vanished, replaced by a heavy silence. Inside, the air was thick and foul, smelling of mold, decay, and something metallic that made their stomachs churn. Dust coated every surface, cobwebs hung from the ceilings, and broken furniture lay scattered across the floors. The house seemed alive, breathing in the darkness, watching their every move. Portraits lined the walls, their subjects' eyes hollowed or scratched out. The friends felt an inexplicable unease, a prickle at the back of their necks. But Olivia urged them forward. Flashlight in hand, they explored cautiously, moving from room to room. In the parlor, a fireplace sat cold, blackened with soot, and dozens of figurines were arranged on the mantel. Teeny dolls, some with missing limbs, all staring at them with lifeless eyes. Ryan laughed nervously, but the sound echoed strangely, distorted and drawn out. The whispers began softly at first, like the wind through broken windows, then louder, leave. Halloween claims the curious stay. Upstairs, the hallways stretched before them, lined with closed doors. At the far end, a faint orange glow spilled from under a door. They approached, hearts pounding, and pushed it open. Inside was a child's bedroom, frozen in time. Torn curtains swayed despite the lack of wind, toys lay scattered across the floor, and a small bed sat in the corner. On a dresser rested a small pumpkin, flickering with candlelight. And there, standing in the shadows, was a figure, a girl, pale, with hollow black eyes and hair hanging limply over her face. She raised a hand slowly, beckoning them closer. The mirror in the room rippled suddenly, revealing distorted reflections. Faces twisted in fear and anguish, mouths opening silently, eyes wide in terror. The shadows in the room stretched along the walls, moving independently, crawling toward them. Olivia felt a cold draft, heard whispers directly in her ear. Halloween is ours. The curious belong to us. Panic overtook their fear-driven curiosity. They bolted toward the door, but it slammed shut violently behind them. The hallway beyond stretched unnaturally, walls twisting and rearranging themselves. Desperation surged. They ran blindly, the mansion itself seeming to shift, trapping them in a labyrinth of darkness. Shadows reached for them, brushing their skin like icy fingers. The dolls on the dresser seemed to move slightly, tilting their heads, watching, analyzing. The girl stepped forward, her hollow eyes fixed on Olivia. Around her, shadows formed figures of children, all trapped in the flickering candlelight, silent and lifeless. Then they noticed the pumpkin on the dresser flickered violently, revealing carved faces, each twisted in terror. Some they recognized from the neighborhood. others from news reports of missing children. Adrenaline drove them to search for an escape. They stumbled upon a trapdoor in the floor, leading to a narrow basement staircase. The air grew colder, damp, and smelled strongly of earth, rot, and something faintly sweet, like decaying fruit. The basement was filled with crates and broken furniture, but in the center was a pedestal. On it sat a pumpkin, carved with countless faces. Beside it stood the girl, her hand hovering over the carvings, and surrounding her were shadows of skeletal figures, silent, watching. The whispering intensified into a deafening roar. Every shadow in the room pressed toward them. Every figurine's eyes glowed faintly as if feeding on their fear. Olivia lunged toward the girl, grabbing her arm, but her hand passed through like smoke. The candlelight flickered, and the shadows surged, pressing in from all sides. The pumpkin on the pedestal suddenly flared, revealing more faces of people who had dared enter the mansion over decades. Frozen in eternal fear, desperation pushed them onward. They scrambled toward a side door, bursting into the night. But the world outside had changed. The fog had thickened, trees twisted unnaturally, shadows reaching across the ground like living arms. Somewhere in the darkness, the girl and the skeletal figures watched, holding pumpkins carved with more faces, flames flickering in unnatural rhythm. The whispers followed, promising eternal Halloween, claiming the curious for their own. They ran blindly through the forest, branches tearing at clothes, shadows brushing against their skin. Hours were, perhaps minutes later, they stumbled onto the familiar main road, the fog lifting. The town appeared normal, Halloween festivities continuing, children laughing, pumpkins glowing. But Olivia, Ryan, and Mia knew what they had seen was real. The mansion, the girl, the carved pumpkin, the whispers all remained alive in their minds. Years passed. Halloween remained a night of fear for them. Shadows moved strangely, whispers lingered in the wind, and the memory of the Hargrove estate never faded. Somewhere the mansion waits, patient and silent, filled with flickering pumpkins, trapped souls, and shadows. Halloween is not just a holiday, is a warning. Curiosity can lead you into darkness, and those who wander too far may never return. And if you ever hear a whisper carried by the wind on Halloween, or see the flicker of candlelight through the fog, remember the Hargrove estate. The shadows are waiting, the pumpkins are watching, and Halloween takes the curious forever.